This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
The Speaker of the National People's Assembly and current President of the Arab Interparliamentary Union UIPA, Ibrahim Boughali, has called here in Algiers for the exploration of all mechanisms and means likely to bring together or to bring before justice the Zionist entity for the crime it is perpetrating against the Palestinian people, particularly in the Gaza Strip. The UN Security Council has adopted a draft resolution on the protection of humanitarian personnel, UN personnel and associated personnel, on which Algeria voted after joining the sponsoring countries. And the Israeli army has pursued its bombardment of the Gaza Strip, including Rafah, in the wake of the International Court of Justice, ICJ, ordering Israel to suspend its operations in the southern city. Those were the headlines, and now the news in detail from Radio Algeria International. First in our news, the Speaker of the National People's Assembly and current President of the Arab Interparliamentary Union, UIPA, Ibrahim Boughali, has called here in Algiers for the exploration of all the mechanisms and means likely to bring before justice the Zionist entity for the crime it is perpetrating against the Palestinian people, particularly in the Gaza Strip. In his opening speech of the 34th session of the UIPA Executive Committee, which started today here in Algiers, Mr. Boughali underlined the extremely serious developments occurring at the regional and international levels, which have grave repercussions on the Arab region, notably in the Palestinian territories, where the innocent Palestinians are being subjected to an ethnic cleansing and abject crimes perpetrated by the Zionist occupier. Recalling in this context that it was an extension of the occupation project aimed at liquidating the Palestinian cause and destabilizing and plunging the region into violence and chaos. Our responsibility as representatives of the Arab peoples in this common Arab parliamentary space, he went on to say, is therefore great and heavy, and our duty consists of working with dedication to consolidate the place of UIPA as well as its role with a view to meeting the demands of the economic situation but also the ambitions of Arab peoples. Affirming that the situation in Gaza and in the occupied Palestinian territories in general will be on the agenda of the 36th UIPA conference, whose proceedings will begin tomorrow Sunday in Algiers, Mr. Boughali called for the need to propose constructive and tangible initiatives with the aim of strengthening joint Arab parliamentary action, particularly at the level of the Interparliamentary Union, and examining all the mechanisms, ways and means allowing to bring the Zionist occupier before justice for its crimes. Let's listen to Mr. Boughali.
All delegations have arrived to participate in the proceedings of the Executive Committee. We have reaffirmed that the central theme is the Palestinian cause, which constitutes a regional and international challenge and has repercussions on the region. We have asked all delegations to propose mechanisms and operational tools to mobilize for the cause and achieve positive results for the benefit of the Palestinian cause and all Arab causes.
It's worth recalling that the 34th session of the Executive Committee of the Arab Parliamentary or Interparliamentary Union UIPA, opened today here in Algiers, will examine the report of the Secretary General of the UIPA on the implementation of the decisions of the previous Congress and the activities of the General Secretariat of the Union since the holding of the 33rd session of its Executive Committee. For his part, the Secretary General of the Arab Interparliamentary Union, APU, Faiz Al-Shawabka, who arrived here in Algiers, commended Algeria and its role that is respected by all Arab countries, expressing the hope that the outcomes of the conference will live up to the expectations of Arab aspirations. Let's listen to Mr. Shawabka.
The Congress is of great importance at this time in particular, and Algeria enjoys the respect of all Arab countries and has global weight, and we hope that the results of this Congress will live up to the Arab ambitions and the ambitions of Algeria in all international forums.
That was the Secretary General of the Arab Interparliamentary Union, Faiz Al-Shawabka. Now, the UN Security Council has adopted a draft resolution on the protection of humanitarian personnel, UN personnel and associated personnel, on which Algeria voted after joining the sponsoring countries. Miriam Bershi has more details in this report.
The draft resolution was adopted but 14 votes in favour, with Russia abstaining. At the end of the vote, the permanent representative of Algeria to the United Nations, Amr Benjameh, stressed in a speech delivered that ensuring the respect of international humanitarian law is the responsibility of all, notably the Security Council and the international community, adding that accountability must be enforced.
It is our responsibility as the international community, and in particular this very Security Council, to ensure that the international humanitarian law is respected by all parties. Accountability and zero impunity are key words.
Mr. Benjameh underlined that all the crimes including in the draft resolutions are blatantly committed by the Israeli occupation in the Palestinian territories, notably the Gaza Strip.
All the crimes, all the violations mentioned in this resolution we have just adopted, yes, all of them are committed by the Israeli occupying forces. If this is not indiscriminate bombardment, if it is not indiscriminate killing, I'm wondering what is this called?
The Algerian diplomat affirmed that since the start of the negotiation process, Algeria has actively adhered to the negotiation process since it started in good faith and in a very constructive manner. He underlined that the outcome of the vote is a clear message from the Council to the humanitarian community, highlighting that their work is highly appreciating, hailing on the occasion all humanitarian personnel, particularly those who sacrificed their lives in the service of humanity.
This outcome is a clear message for the Council to the humanitarian community. Your work is highly appreciated and valued, and you deserve protection in accordance with international humanitarian law, which all parties to conflict should respect.
Finally, Ambassador Benjameh expressed his thanks to the Swiss delegation for the work accomplished and the facilitation of the negotiations concerning this resolution, which comes at the right time and which is of great importance, stressing that the final version was balanced and reflected several of our priorities.
Since the start of the negotiations process, Algeria had actively engaged in good faith and in a very constructive manner. And we thank the delegation of Switzerland for their openness and collaborative approach and for accommodating some of our proposals. This final draft was balanced and reflects a number of our priorities, and we were glad to sponsor it.
The Algerian ambassador also thanked the Chinese and Brazilian delegations for their participation in the launch of this decisive initiative, which has already proven its importance in light of the current aggression carried out by the Zionist occupying forces against Gaza. At the end of his speech, Mr. Benjameh stressed that the decisions of the International Court of Justice, ICJ, were legally binding and that the Zionist occupier must comply with it and immediately cease its military attacks and other acts of aggression in Rafah.
And the Speaker of the Council of the Nation, Salah Goujil, has put forward the central role of pilot farms in the revival of the agriculture sector, set as absolute priority in the program of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune. A communique issued by the Council of the Nation indicated that Goujil underlined the important role of pilot farms, in particular agricultural cooperatives, in cutting off dependency on foreigners and in strengthening political independence by economic independence or through the achievement of self-sufficiency and food security as part of the foundations of the new Algeria. The head of the Senate, Goujil, indicated that they previously discussed with the Minister of the Agriculture, Youssef Sharfa, and the National Union of Algerian Peasants the idea of creating cooperatives to shorten the production and sales process and allow producer farmers to organize themselves in order to send and market their products directly to the consumer. He insisted on the imperative to encourage the creation of cooperatives for all strategic agricultural sectors, such as milk, cereals, and others, which will contribute to the regulation of the markets and the reduction in prices, with all strengthen the availability of products to meet consumer needs. The 10th World Water Forum has ended in the resort town of Bali, in Indonesia, after 5 days of meeting during which Algeria has stood out for its steadfast stances affirming the right of access to water and to the principle of the state sovereignty over its groundwater, without ignoring the climate issue which will continue to rise for the next generations. Majid Mila has more details in this report.
The meeting was the largest water global gathering, bringing together heads of state and government, ministers, stakeholders, experts, and civil society from more than 170 countries to discuss topics related to managing this vital resource and finding sustainable solutions to the many challenges, including sanitation and environment. Algeria was represented by a large delegation at the forum placed under the theme Water for Shared Prosperity. The Minister of Hydraulics, Tahar Derbel, reaffirmed Algeria's position on water issue with the aim of ensuring all its citizens access to the resource. During his speech, Derbel indicated that with the advent of global warming, the water issue has increasingly been raised on the international scene, causing Algeria to resort to non-conventional water. In this connection, he mentioned seawater desalination, an area in which Algeria is experiencing a new dynamic within the framework of the orientations of the President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, by deploying colossal means with the aim of facing water stress. During his meeting with the chairman of the World Water Council, Loic Fauchan, and organizer of the forum, Derbel insisted on Algerians' attachment to the principle of sovereignty of states over their underground waters. In this regard, he recalled the efforts made by Algeria as part of the three-party agreement signed with Tunisia and Libya for the management of groundwater shared between the three countries. On the climate issue, the minister emphasized during his speech and meetings he had with his counterparts and the participation delegations the importance of the preservation of the environment and ecosystems in any project related to water. He evoked the case of the Sahara region located in the southwest of the country, which is experiencing a drain up of its water resource, mainly on account of the over-exploitation of the resource caused by projects undertaken on the border by a neighboring country.
And Algeria has welcomed in Geneva the adoption by the member states of the World Intellectual Property Organization of the Treaty on Intellectual Property, Genetic Resources and Associated Traditional Knowledge, qualifying it as historical. The declaration or the delegation of the permanent mission of Algeria to the United Nations office in Geneva and international organization in Switzerland, which adhere to the press release read by the representative of Kenya on behalf of the African group, delighted at the success of the diplomatic conference, which resulted in the adoption of a historic treaty on intellectual property, genetic resources, and associated traditional knowledge. And the Israeli army has pursued its bombardment of the Gaza Strip, including Rafah, in the wake of the International Court of Justice, ICJ, ordering Israel to suspend and halt its operations in the southern city. The ruling issued yesterday ordered the Israeli occupying authorities to keep the crossing point of Rafah open to allow humanitarian aid. The crossing point, located in the far south of the enclave, was closed by the Israeli authorities when they launched their operations on the area early this month. In this connection, the U.S. Secretary General Antonio Guterres recalled that the ICJ's decisions were binding and must be respected. The ICJ's ruling was also hailed by the Palestinian representative to the UN, Riyad Mansour, who recalled that previous decisions taken by the court have already called for an end to the Israeli crimes perpetrated in the Gaza Strip.
The provisional measures adopted by the ICJ, we are grateful for South Africa and those who supported them for going back to the ICJ, asking them for additional provisional measures. And we welcome these provisional measures, including stopping, the military operation in Rafah, We believe that the provisional measures of the ICJ also previously asked for stopping all military operations in the Gaza Strip and stopping these crimes and potential crimes of genocide against our people in the Gaza Strip.
This came as the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, Francesca Albanese, today urged the international community to cut off diplomatic ties and to impose sanctions on Israel until it abides by the ICJ's ruling. She deplored that despite the court's decision ordering an immediate halt to its acts of aggression on Rafah, Israel had intensified its offensive on the city. Meanwhile, Italy announced the resumption of its financing of UNRWA, which coordinates almost all aid in Gaza. According to the UN, situation is alarming in the Gaza Strip on account of risks of famine at a time when the continued Israeli attacks have caused about 800,000 people to flee Rafah over the 2 past weeks. And in the West Bank, the Israeli occupation forces have arrested 15 Palestinians, including former prisoners, in various governorates of the occupied Palestinian part, or the West Bank. During the arrest operation, the occupation forces committed abuses and made threats against the detainees and their families, not to mention sabotaging and destroying Palestinian homes. The leader of the movement Al-Bina party, Mr. Abdelkader Ben Grina, has announced that his party unanimously backed the candidacy of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, in the presidential election scheduled for September 7th for a new mandate in order to carry through the building of the project of a new Algeria. The decisions were unanimously adopted by the party's consultative council during a meeting held here in Algiers. And Radio Algeria International has carried an exclusive report, the signing of a joint memorandum of understanding between Algeria and France related to the memory file following the 5th meeting of the joint committee concerned with this matter. The correspondent of Radio Algeria International, Karim Hamdan, reported the news, which drew widespread attention from the national, Maghreb, and international media, which highlighted the importance of the agreement in recovering the Algerian archive from the colonial era, which holds priceless historical value for the Algerian people. And finally, in Sudan, UN humanitarian workers said that the situation had deteriorated in the capital of Sudan's North Darfur state, El Fasher, since the outbreak of deadly armed clashes. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, stressed that the clashes during which heavy weapons were used in densely populated areas between the Sudanese and the Sudanese army and the rapid support paramilitary forces have caused hundreds of civilians casualties and forced thousands of people to flee their homes. With this last piece of news, we will come to the end of this news bulletin. Time now for our weekly programs. We'll meet you again tomorrow for a fresh edition of our news bulletin. Thank you.